Welcome aboard the Lux Labellum, a ship we have built to help us navigate through the perilous galaxy of the 41st millennium. In this video, we will focus on the Xenos threat of the Tyranids, starting with their first encounter with the Imperium of Man on the planet of Tyran Primus, going over how they wage war, what bioorganisms they use to achieve their singular goal, and what truly is the scale of the threat mankind faces against a Great Devourer. The Tyranids are a swarming species, whose main purpose is to consume any and all organic matter they come across, afterwards utilizing the genetic material of their prey to further their own evolution and adaptation. This makes them a formidable and challenging adversary, one that can adapt quickly to any situation. In reality, the Tyranid hive fleets are made up of several diverse species, each of which performs a specific function. The Hive Mind, a gigantic gestalt being at the center of their race, directs and coordinates the activity of the entire swarm. Warriors, gene stealers, and hormagaunts are only a few examples of the many specialized bioforms that suit these needs. Let us know in the comments below which bioform, in your opinion, is the deadliest creature from the Tyranid race. The species is entirely dedicated to its own survival, propagation of genetic material, and its evolutionary advancement. They are the apex predators of the galaxy, and everything, from the smallest form of life to the most developed interstellar civilization, is little more than a meal to them. There can be no negotiations with the Tyranids. They are here to consume us all. The first encounter of the Tyranids with the Imperium of Man was around the year 745 of the 41st millennia, and it happened on the galaxy's eastern fringes, specifically on Tyran Primus, a once prosperous ocean world on the distant edge of the Milky Way galaxy. It was the home of a small research station run mainly by the Adeptus Mechanicus. During the solar decade before the first contact at Tyran, Imperial explorators made a list of the star systems near Tyran Primus, as it was standard procedure. In that point in time, according to Imperial records, humanity was blissfully unaware of the terrifying new menace looming from the void of space. A peculiar disturbance, however, was eventually uncovered by these explorators. Worlds that were once thought to be lush, planets full of exotic flora and fauna, had been stripped bare, leaving nothing but lifeless rocks drifting in the void. The Adeptus Administratum's Explorator General was notified of the abnormality, but no further investigation was mandated. Many more anomalies and threats existed that required the attention and resources of the Imperium, and some bare planets located at the very edge of the known galaxy were not in the list of priorities. Nonetheless, the outpost on Tyran continued to file reports about their discoveries of an ever-increasing number of dead worlds. Some may say that the slow-moving bureaucracy of the Imperium and their inability to act fast would turn out to be the undoing of Tyran Prime. But perhaps it is safe to say that even if they had acted quickly, they were doomed from the beginning. The Tyranids collectively form a monstrous ensemble of bioships known as a hive fleet, which travels across the void with the only goal of systematically consuming all other living biomatter to assure their own survival, enable the reproduction and rapid evolution. Nothing more, nothing less. And it was one of these hive fleets that caused the utter destruction of Tyran Primus. Hive Fleet Behemoth was drawing ever closer to the planet, and would soon descend upon it. But the outpost would not be caught completely off guard, and before the Tyranids' planetfall, the Defender knew that a Xenos invasion was likely coming. This is because a survey spaceship returning from a study of yet another dead world encountered a cloud of mysterious objects entering the edge of the Tyran system. Soon after, the explorator craft returned to the Imperial headquarters in orbit of Tyran Primus, carrying its grave message and a report of what was seen, despite being damaged by what appeared to be mines constructed of organic tissue on the very edge of this newly found cloud. In light of the fact that Tyran was located on the very outskirts of Imperial space, in a particularly hazardous and undiscovered frontier region of the galaxy, the planet had been prudently equipped with weaponry that was thought sufficient to ward off attacks by hostile Xenos, pirates, and the predators that lurked the vast oceans of that world. The Tyran outpost was guarded by 4 enormous planetary defense lasers, each of which was also defended by fortified ceramite silos and void shield generators. Further support for the quantity of firepower was provided by 36 interceptor emplacements, equipped with autocannons and laser cannons, as well as an interconnected network of defense bastions and bunkers. Also strong was the Imperial garrison that had been stationed on Tyran Primus. In addition to the cybernetic Skitarii bodyguard that protected the outpost's Adeptus Mechanicus commander, Magos Varnak, Tyran was also home to 3 complete wings of Thunderbolt fighters from the Imperial Navy, 3 Endeavor-class light cruisers, and an entire infantry regiment from the Astra Militarum, supported by veteran Catachan jungle fighters who are commonly used to fighting the wild beasts that are often seen on their home world. All in all, Tyran was equipped with what was deemed as adequate armaments and manpower to defend against extragalactic threats at the fringe of the Imperium. Just a few solar days after the encounter with the mysterious cloud, bioships started entering orbit, and the planetary defenses of Tyran Primus opened fire. The cannons roared for more than a solar hour as the eternally dismal and stormy skies of Tyran were ruptured in glorious blasts of coherent light as the base's gunners barraged the swarm of Xenos invaders that poured towards them. But just as the defense lasers glowed white-hot from the constant overheating, the invaders mysteriously withdrew. The new threat had been successfully eliminated, as the outpost defenses had proven too much for the Xenos invaders. A hail of cheers was heard across the defense lines as the Astra Militarum celebrated in victory. Magos Varnak, boldened by overconfidence in his own forces, ordered his small fleet of Imperial Navy cruisers to harry the withdrawing vessels. But this proved to be a mistake. Varnak was still ignorant of the true scope of what they faced. By feigning their defeat, the bioships were able to successfully draw the Imperial cruisers away from the protection provided by the planet's defense laser emplacements. The Imperial ships quickly discovered, to their horror, thousands upon thousands of bioships of all shapes and forms approaching the planet. The force they had repelled was but a fraction of what was now coming against them. Suddenly, the Tyranid ships turned around and attacked the undefended Imperial vessels. The ship, named Emperor's Fist, was the first to fall. Its hull was shredded by a voracious swarm of organisms that was vomited forth by a strange bioship.
Blessed Emperor, get us out of here, all speed! They must be warned. Someone must!
The Righteous Destiny was the second to fall. This one to a squirming cluster of tentacles that grasped it and pulled it into a gigantic, gaping maw of one of the Hive ships. The Sword of Warriors was the only ship able to transmit a warning to Tyran before also being destroyed. They were finishing the message when the solid adamantium hull plates of the spaceship were gnawed through by leech-like pseudopods, which then let loose a swarm of ferocious gene stealers into the spacecraft's bridge and lower decks. As the terrified crew quickly discovered, these fierce opponents were more than deadly and effective in close quarters, capable of tearing through steel in armor plating with their lethal claws and other bioweapons never before seen by the Imperium at the time. Within a matter of minutes, the whole crew was butchered to a man, and the cruiser was left to drift aimlessly, with all its crew dead. The ship would soon be absorbed, and all its biomatter incorporated into the Hive Fleet's reserve supplies. With the pursuing ships destroyed, the Xenos now turned their full attention to Tyran Primus, firing thousands upon thousands of mycetic spores towards its surface. In spite of the fact that the defense lasers were able to kill a significant number of the potentially dangerous pods, still thousands of mycetic spores plummeted to the surface of the planet and smashed into the turbulent waters below. Quickly enough, the sea waters began to boil as the invaders burst from the spores and slaughtered the predators of Tyran's oceans. Following this, the Xenos emerged from the waters and began scaling the walls of the Imperial garrison. At first, the regiment of Imperial Guardsmen were successful in driving the ravenous swarm back with focused volleys of laser fire. In the blackened skies above, more of the mycetic spores continued to fall to the surface as the planetary defense turrets roared in defiance, killing many of them, but failing to stop the vast majority. The garrison fought valiantly, cutting massive holes through the alien line like a scythe of death with heavy fire and coordinated efforts. The hides of the smaller alien bioforms offered no protection from their concentrated laser fire, and were no match at all for the autocannons of the interceptor grid erected around the base. Hormagaunts and gene stealers were ripped apart in great numbers, and their dead bodies filled the killing zones that had been strategically placed between the protected bastions of the outpost. Thunderbolt fighters roared above in the sky, shooting down any incoming spores with precision fire before darting away to find their next target. Despite the overwhelming numbers of alien bioforms, the planetary defense was putting up a valiant fight and holding off the invaders. But the course of the fight was about to change. Suddenly, the northern planetary defense laser fell silent. Thousands of horrific gargoyles had thrown themselves into its barrel, clogging the gigantic beam projectors with their charred bodies. This had been a coordinated attack, as the flying creatures seemed to have moved in perfect coordination, sacrificing themselves in favor of the greater goal. In a similar vein, and in spite of the valiant attempts of the Thunderbolt fighter pilots, their aircrafts crashed to the ground because the spores in the air clogged their engines and prevented them from functioning properly. As the defenders saw this, the Eastern Planetary Defense Laser also fell silent, as a massive predator breached its steel walls and tore the enormous weapon's coolant lines apart. The creature, never before seen, would later be classified in Imperial records as a Carnifex. It is a living engine of destruction that is armed with the most advanced Tyranid bioweapons and is capable of tearing through walls, gates, tanks, and more. The Imperial defense network quickly began to collapse. In fact, only a mere hour after these events, the Imperial outpost on Tyran Primus was overrun. Every single one of the bastions had been leveled. There was complete silence coming from the planetary defense lasers, as its crew were all dead. Even the Catachan jungle fighters of the Astra Militarum had deserted their stations and fled into the rain in the vain hope that they may escape the horrific end that many of the others had suffered. None were able to successfully escape their doom, and many died impaled, cut in half, melted, or devoured by the many bioorganisms that pursued them. The command bunkers still stood with the last defenders trapped within it, but its walls began to crack under the impact of massive strikes from some of the larger bioforms. Through the few remaining displays that were still functioning, Magos Varnak saw in horror the unstoppable, insatiable tide of Xenos destroying his once impregnable outpost. As soon as the adamantium gate of the bunker began to break inwards, the swarm immediately began to enter the command bunker. Both Imperial Guardsmen and Skitarii battled with flamethrowers and whatever weapon they could find. But the sheer quantity of enemies was too much to contain, and the Xenos clawed and hacked their way forward. Knowing that this would be his end, Varnak triggered a special switch that sent a data codex plummeting into the depths of what remained of the outpost, before being torn apart by the aliens, hoping to devour his biomass. Tyran Primus was lost. Inquisitor Fidus Cryptman arrived to the now desolate world almost a full year later, shocked to find a sterile, dead planet that now bore no sign of the thriving, prosperous ocean world that it had been once. It had been sucked dry and scoured of all life and water. He explored the eerie, empty outpost, not finding a single scrap of vegetation. No bodies, no bones, nothing. But deep within the crater that used to be the outpost, he did find the data codex that Varnak had left before being devoured. The most precious data mankind would ever find on the first contact with this new Xenos threat. As he reviewed the logs, video recordings, images, and audio, the true horror of the assault was revealed.
We cannot live through this. Mankind cannot live through this. In a single day, they have covered this planet with a flood of living blades and needle-fanged mouths. Kill one, and 10 take its place. If they are truly without number, then our race is doomed to a violent death before every shred of our civilization is scoured away by a force more voracious than the fires of hell themselves. Death. By the machine god, death is here.
Cryptman left the dead world Tyran Primus behind, to warn the galaxy of the aliens that now posed a threat greater than whatever they had faced before. If the fate of the Tyran outpost would never have been discovered, the Imperium would have been kept in the dark about what was to come. Then and there, the Inquisitor named the Xenos race the Tyranids, after the first Imperial world they had devoured. Throughout the long history of the Imperium of Man, the invasion of Tyran marked a significant turning point. It showed that the galaxy was far more dangerous and unpredictable than anyone had previously thought, and that there were threats out there that the Imperium was ill-equipped to deal with. The Imperium of Man would never be the same again, after the beginning of the horror that would later be known as the Tyrannic Wars. Macragge is a place of utmost importance, as it is the home world of one of the most iconic chapters of Space Marines, the Ultramarines, and the capital of the realm of Ultramar. It also happened to be next in the path of the approaching Tyranid Hive Fleet. The Ultramarines have been given advance notice of the approaching enemy, as a result of the findings that Ordo Xenos Inquisitor Cryptman had made at Tyran Primus and other newly found consumed worlds. The chapter master of the Ultramarines, Marnius Calgar, immediately began formulating his defense strategy after becoming aware of the danger that the Hive Fleet behemoth posed to Ultramar. The order was given to further strengthen the already powerful defenses of the capital. There were already many battleships hanging in orbit, and each day more began to arrive. As reinforcements made their way from across the system and the wider galaxy, thousands of ships, from small craft to massive troop transports and dreadnoughts, came and went. The sky was filled with the flicker of thrusters and the hum of engines as ships moved in every direction, each with its own specific task. Enormous strike cruisers projected shadows over civilian vessels and Imperial Navy destroyers. On the ground, the spaceports, bunkers, walls, and the city itself was a bustling hive of activity, with a constant stream of materials and troops flowing in and out. The sound of boots hitting the ground mixed with the roar of vengeance as crates were unloaded from ships and hauled away by servo skulls and labor servitors. The acrid smell of promethium and ozone hung heavy in the air, as fuel and ammunition were loaded onto ships in preparation for the upcoming siege. Marnius Calgar, along with the highest-ranking Imperial officers, worked tirelessly, poring over tactical maps and troop movements, coordinating the efforts of the various factions and military units that were gathering at the defense points. Among the endless activity, Squads of Space Marines, clad in their recognizable power armor, marched with purpose through the commotion. They were aware that the approaching siege would be a fight for the existence of their homeworld. Yet their expressions were unmoved, and their eyes were focused on the mission at hand. The planet was far from defenseless. It possessed both a powerful fleet of warships and orbital defense stations that were equally as threatening. Plus, the massive garrison that set up the defenses dwarfed the one at Tyrant Primus in comparison. This was Macragge, the Imperium's bulwark on the eastern frontier, and homeworld of an entire chapter of Space Marines. The might of the proud Ultramarines was on full display. And then the Tyranids came. Just a few solar weeks later, the first Tyranid bioship struck Macragge. In the distance, the sound of artillery fire could be heard as the first shots of the impending battle rang out. The siege had started, and the fate of the planet hung in the balance. Soon enough, thousands of alien predators rampaged across Macragge as hundreds of bioships swept aside attacks by Ultramarine strike cruisers and broke through the planet's blockade to finally descend onto the surface. Calgar consolidated his ground forces into 3 armies because he determined the Tyranid threat was too great to face unilaterally. Each of Macragge's polar fortresses was garrisoned by the 1st and 2nd task forces, mostly consisting of veterans from the 1st Company, as well as other regiments from the Ultramaran Planetary Defense Corps. In an effort to impede the advance of the Tyranids, Calgar himself led the 3rd Force in a series of rearguard engagements that had the main goal of stopping the advance of the Tyranids and eradicating the key organisms that operated the Hive Mind neurotransmitters. In the early days of the siege, Calgar was able to deal significant blows with the swarms of Tyranids, using the landscape of the planet itself as a weapon, and using every stratagem and tactic at his disposal. His strategic brilliance allowed him to buy time for his battle brothers to the northern and southern fortresses, and relieve pressure from them. But despite this, the Xenos kept coming in seemingly never-ending numbers. One of the deadliest characteristics of the Tyranids is that they can quickly adapt and change to overcome the forces and the strategies that are used against them. By this point in the attack, the Hive Mind had already identified the Chapter Master of the Ultramarines as the most dangerous threat for the advance of the swarm. So it created a solution to counter this. It was in the location designated as Cold Steel Ridge that the Ultramarines came face to face with the most dangerous Tyranid creature they had come across to this point. One whose innate understanding of combat was on par with their own strategic acumen. Somehow, this creature was able to foil the plans of the Ultramarines, and the Tyranids that were subject to its psychic dominion started to apply their own tactics and stratagems to overrun the positions held by the Space Marines. This bioform would later be classified in Imperial records as a Swarm Lord.
A new tyrant joined the fray, and in an eye blink the whole character of the swarm changed. The ravening berserker spirit that had driven the Tyranids onto the ridge was gone as if it had never existed. Left in its place something cannier and infinitely more worrisome. It was then that I knew the battle to be lost.
The new monster charged headfirst into the fight, alongside a wave of specialist Hive warriors, clearing a route that led directly to Calgar. The Lord of Ultramar did not back down from his position, and with every blow, he dealt severe damage to the Xenos creatures. But there were far too many Tyranids, and Calgar was wounded several times as a result. Still, like the mighty warrior he is, he stood face to face with the Swarm Lord, and the two powerful beings engaged in a deadly close combat duel. Even though Calgar fought with every ounce of strength left in him, he was ultimately defeated by the monster's blades. It was only thanks to the sacrifice of his honor guard that intervened and fought against the Swarm Lord that Calgar was able to limp back to safety and be carried away to orbit in a Thunderhawk to receive urgent medical care. As the battle raged on, and with Calgar gravely wounded, the Tyranids pressed on the attack. The northern and southern fortresses were heavily besieged. Despite being outmatched, the Ultramarines fought fiercely, determined to protect their homeworld. The veterans from the First Company regularly led daring counterattacks to thwart the march of the Tyranids before retreating to defend their walls and trenches. Yet the viciousness of the churning swarm continued unabated. The Tyranids were able to take control of the walls of the northern fortress by taking cover behind the steaming mounds of their own dead. The sheer weight of the numbers was enough to bring even the towering god machines to their knees. Carnifexes, armed with scythes, charged the fortifications held by the defenders like sentient sledgehammers, tearing their way through rockcrete and metal walls with equal ferocity. Despite the fact that sufficient stores had been constructed to last throughout several months of siege, ammunition began to run low, and the weapons began to overheat, the barrels of many guns even melting due to the sheer amount of firing. The Ultramarines continued their fight, despite being pushed more and more into the depths of their fortresses, as one defensive position after another was being overrun. In orbit, the Hive ships capitalized on their progress and their victories on the surface of the planet by unleashing thousands upon thousands of mycetic spores directly onto Macragge's northern and southern polar fortresses. Calgar, still recovering from his fight with the Swarm Lord, refused all medical assistance other than that which was absolutely necessary. He then seized command of the remaining vessels and immediately began harassing the Hive fleet as it spread out to encircle Macragge. The Tyranid Hive Mind decided to withdraw its bioships from Macragge in order to entice the defending Ultramarine ships away and into the space above, just as they did on Tyran Primus, but also to prevent the Space Marines from coming to the aid of the besieged polar fortresses. Calgar fell for the trap set by the Tyranids, and pursued the Tyranid fleet. But he did so with his own strategy in place. The Chapter Master's plan quickly materialized, as the timely arrival of the full battle fleet Tempestus of the Imperial Navy, coming from Bacca, effectively sealed the Tyranids' doom by trapping the Hive fleet in a strong grip between the two Imperial fleets. The Imperial ships wasted no time and unleashed a barrage of torpedoes and macro cannons at the Hive fleet. But It was confirmed that even then, the Imperial fleet was outnumbered by the Tyranids. The Tyranids launched boarding parties of gene stealers and hormigons to assault the Ultramarine ships, while their bioships engaged in deadly dogfights with Imperial gunships and fighter craft. Even surrounded, the Tyranids were getting the upper hand in the fierce battle in space. If not for the selfless act of sacrifice from the brave crew of the battleship named Dominus Astra, that crucial fight would have been lost. The massive Emperor-class battleship charged at full speed into the center of the Hive fleet and exploded its own warp drives, generating a warp vortex that sucked the battleship and the whole Tyranid fleet into oblivion. Given that they were trapped between the fire of two Imperial fleets, almost all of the bioships belonging to the Hive fleet behemoth were annihilated in the vortex, or shredded from the unrelenting crossfire of the Imperial cannons. Only a very small number of organisms managed to escape into the depths of space. The battle in space had been won at a heavy cost, and even then, it was still not over. Whilst the battle raged and resolved above the planet, the valor and resilience of the Ultramarines was being tested as never before on the fortresses below. Hundreds of thousands of bioorganisms still remained on the surface of Macragge, Calgar, and all the starships that had managed to avoid destruction in the space battle turned around and raced back to the planet in an effort to rescue the besieged fortresses. The Ultramarines of the Third Company were the first to arrive. They descended in drop pods and Thunderhawk gunships, landing in the northern fortress where the Ultramarines' First Company had been fighting and holding their ground. All communications had been lost with them for hours. As soon as the Astartes had made planetfall, they saw the vast scenes of destruction, results of the terrible battle that had taken place. The stench of death choked the air, and soon the sound of screeching would rise, until hundreds of Tyranids attacked the newly arrived Marines. Creatures swarmed over walls, craters, and dead bodies. Waves of Tyranids with the only instinct to kill. The Ultramarines fought back with grim determination, their bolters and chainswords cutting through the alien horde. With the help of Devastator squads and dreadnoughts, the Ultramarines went inside the fortress itself to look for their battle brothers. The Third Company made their way through murky hallways and ichor-dripping passageways that were still dangerous and filled with enemy aliens. With fire and bolter, they cleansed the tight corridors until reaching the lower generatorium. There, the room was littered with piles of dead Tyranids, and a ring of slain Terminators marked the spot where the last Ultramarines of the First Company had fought shoulder to shoulder until the last man. They were all dead. Afterwards, it was reported that there were a few survivors found in the ruins of Macragge's southern fortress, but there were none found in the northern fortress, where the First Company had made their valiant last stand.
Remember the names of the honored fallen. Recall their deeds and know that their sacrifice honors the chapter. No son of Guilliman could wish for a more glorious death.
The battle for Macragge was won, but at a great cost. The Ultramarines suffered heavy losses as many of their battle brothers fell in combat. The Tyranids, however, were dealt a severe blow, and Hive Fleet Behemoth was eventually destroyed. The battle for Macragge remains a symbol of the Ultramarines' courage and resilience, and a testament to the Imperium's determination to protect its people from any threat. Hive Fleet Behemoth was the first tendril of the Tyranid invasion to attack in the known galaxy. Its ruthless and reckless charge into the eastern front of the Imperium was driven by their insatiable hunger and triggered the First Tyrannic War. Behemoth was but the first in a series of hive fleets that would assail the Imperium in the coming years. After eating all of the biological and organic material on a recently invaded world, Tyranid hive fleets typically move in ad hoc formations known as tendrils, migrating to nearby planetary systems and reproducing many times their initial number. When a hive fleet comes across a prey world, they do not attack for the purpose of gaining territory, nor do they do so out of a sense of pride, revenge, or glory. Instead, they invade in order to collect valuable biomass that they use to satisfy their voracious and endless appetite. It is a matter of survival. A never-ending supply of food is necessary for the Tyranids, not just to maintain the health of the hive fleets, but to also breed new creatures. Hence, when a hive fleet invades a world that is abundant in life, every action that is taken by each and every Tyranid creature is honed, sharpened to a common objective: the complete and efficient assimilation of that world's organic populations, ecosystems, and bioresources. In order to achieve this objective, the Hive Fleet raises an arsenal of varied bioorganisms with the specific goal of vanquishing any and all protectors of the prey world before the globe is stripped of all of its biomatter and consumed in its entirety. Since many planets and locations across the galaxy are inhabited by all manners of Xenos races, humanoids, and creatures that intend to defend their planets in case of invasion, the bioorganisms that now conform the Tyranids are a very extended and diverse roster of creatures created to kill and bring low all manners of foes. They have simply adapted to overcome any defense, to hack down any defender that would stand in their way. They have adapted to devour worlds. They have evolved to become the apex predator. Just as what happened with the world of Tyran Prime, which was consumed in its entirety and left drifting in space as a giant dead rock. When a Tyranid hive fleet invades a prey world with the intention of stripping all life from the planet, it accomplishes it in several separate stages. Each new wave of the invasion brings with it a new group of biological nightmares that have been fine-tuned to plant the seeds of destruction and death. In a matter of days, the planet that may have been previously prosperous is completely bereft of every last trace of organic matter. After being temporarily satisfied, the hive quickly leaves in search of its next target, looking for its next planet to consume. leaving behind nothing but an empty shell, a new dead star. Inquisitor Fidus Cryptman made it his life goal to study the Tyranid threat. He was the first to discover this horrible menace, and he made its presence known to the galaxy, and then became a keen observer of the terrible Tyrannic wars, and then enlisted many others to this mission. His goal was a simple one: to understand this world-eating Xenos plague, so that humanity could stem the alien tide and then purge it with the Emperor's eternal flame. But that goal cannot be accomplished without the sacrifice of many lives across countless battles, using each as an opportunity to gather data on what hideous forms these Tyranids can produce and what their capabilities are. Alongside many others, Cryptman and his allies discovered that the Tyranids had an extremely rapid rate of evolution, creating new variations of their forms to suit whatever obstacle they came against. These are called bioforms by the researching community. It is believed that understanding these bioforms will prove to be the key in discovering if the Tyranids have a weakness that can be effectively exploited. Unfortunately, it is also believed that more sacrifice will be needed. More blood will be spilt before any light of hope is truly found. Now, let's dive into the stages of a Tyranid invasion, and let's explore the different bioforms the Tyranids use to accomplish their hellish goal.
There is a cancer eating at the Imperium. With each decade, it advances deeper, leaving drained, dead worlds in its wake. This horror, this abomination, has thought and purpose which functions on an unimaginable galactic scale, and all we can do is try to stop the swarms of bioengineered monsters it unleashes upon us by instinct. We have given the horror a name to salve our fears. We call it the Tyranid race. But if it is aware of us at all, it must know us only as prey.
Our YouTube channel is devoted to exploring the innumerable interesting details of the expansive Warhammer universe. If you are enjoying the content, please consider supporting us by commenting, giving us a like, and sharing this episode with your fellow Warhammer fans. Small actions like these are the ones that help us greatly with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps the content get recommended and reach more people. A massive thank you to all of our patrons and YouTube channel members. Your support enables us to keep providing you the greatest Warhammer content we possibly can. Thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy this lore presentation. The infiltration process is the initial step in any Tyranid invasion. This phase is distinguished by its subtlety. At this point, the Xenos assess the planet's viability for an attack and begin infecting the native life forms. This method entails sending out stealthy, quick-moving creatures to explore the planets and collect information about it. Some of these abominations are referred to as gene stealers, and they serve as the forerunners of the Tyranid swarm. Gene stealers are incredibly adaptable creatures who are able to conceal themselves in any setting. They have long, extremely sharp claws that are capable of ripping through armor, and they can infect other species with their genetic material. Because of this, they are able to produce hybrids that are composed of both Tyranid and host species. Before directly attacking any defender, the gene stealers adapt themselves well to their surroundings. Once they have established a foothold on the world, they immediately set about forming cults among the native species. The members of these cults are infected with Tyranid genetic material, and their mission is to prepare the world for the arrival of the swarm of Tyranids. It can be said that the Gene Stealer cult has 3 main goals that it strives to accomplish. First, it gives the Tyranids the opportunity to collect intelligence about the planet and the defenses it has, which will give them an advantage when they start their assault. Second, it establishes a network of infected individuals who will attempt to weaken the planet's defenses from the inside, making it simpler for the Tyranids to take the world. And finally, it supplies a source of biomass for the Tyranids to ingest once they have finally and successfully completed their invasion of the planet. This whole process can take years to bring into fruition, from the contamination of an infected subject all the way to the deadly and the sudden rise of a fully fledged Gene Stealer cult.
Foul creatures known as Gene Stealers infiltrate unvigilant worlds. A patriarch arises from the population's subverted flesh and projects a psychic beacon to draw the Hive fleet ever closer.
While this happens, other creatures are also in action. Vanguard drone ships are able to stealthily explore new star systems thanks to their high speed, their comparatively diminutive size, and the low psychic and propulsion signatures they emit. It is a common practice for a Vanguard drone ship to offload some of its cargo onto the surface of a potentially fit planet, and then immediately flee the system in order to investigate potential targets in other star systems. One of the creatures that are commonly dropped by these ships are the infamous Lictors. After being dropped off by a drone ship, the Lictors waste no time in venturing out into the uncharted regions of the newly discovered planet. They examine the atmosphere, the availability of minerals, and the features of all types of life using their feeder tendrils. In addition, these vicious predators seek for solitary creatures and even sapient beings to consume, while simultaneously absorbing the memories of the prey they kill. As soon as a synaptic node is within range, a compilation of all of this vital information is performed and then transmitted to the Hive Mind. This helps the approaching Tyranid fleet determine what the weather conditions will be, the type of terrain the planet has, and ultimately, what types of bioorganisms it must unleash once the point of full assault begins. Any Lictor that can be effectively destroyed prior to the start of a full Tyranid invasion can significantly slow down the attack, as the invading Xenos will be less optimized for the ecosystem of the planet they are attacking, and key information about potential targets or dangers are lost. All of these organisms have physiological abilities geared for concealment. These abilities are fully utilized so that they can safely study the natural surroundings at first. Because there are frequently only a few Tyranids involved at the stage, these specimens demonstrate an unusual level of self-preservation. These are agile and secretive creatures who conduct their operations with the stealth, concentration, and effectiveness that comes naturally to creatures of their kind, for which the conservation of energy is a vital component of the survival strategy. The arrival of the Hive ship and the vessels that are escorting it reveals the beginning of the next stage of the invasion. The world of the prey is suddenly cast in a massive shadow that blocks out the sun, and the sound of flapping wings can be heard throughout the atmosphere. The terrified inhabitants of the planet look up to witness sky swarms from the Hive fleet descending upon them. Identified points of resistance are attacked and swarmed by the flying monstrosities, while they create a screen for the rest of the upcoming Tyranid broods. But just as this happens, something terrible is done by the Great Devourer. The approaching Hive ship, which acts as a powerful synaptic node of the Hive Mind, is able to interfere with the warp in an area that extends for several light years. This is a suffocating, psychic signal that covers entire star systems and interferes with all types of warp travel and communication. As an effect of this, it is often too late for a planetary defense station or defending fleet to send out an astropathic message or other psychic cry for help. The planet that is prey to the Tyranids is suddenly isolated and condemned to face alone the swarm that is coming against them.
Emperor's mercy, they blocked us out. We're on our own.
As the sky darkens even further with the arrival of more bioships, mycetic spores and sky swarms are being constantly unleashed upon the surface of the planet. Gargoyles are a ferocious Tyranid bioform that has wings, and they are frequently the first species of Tyranids to be spotted when the Tyranids attack a planet. It would appear that their primary mission is to hunt down the adversary and spread fear and confusion among their ranks. Gargoyles are designed to engage in ranged warfare, yet they are not completely useless in close quarters fighting. They have the ability to spit a poisonous fluid, which they automatically direct at the eyes of their opponents in order to cause them to go blind. After that, they relentlessly attack their adversary with their talons and barb-tipped tails, until either they or their target are killed. Present in this aerial assault are also harpies, ferocious Tyranids that take the form of flying creatures. They are larger and more powerful than their closely related bioform, the gargoyle. The majority of their attacks are directed to hostile aircraft, as well as ground-based anti-aircraft systems. The harpies swarm around their targets, tearing them apart with their talons and blasting bioacidic spines from their backs. Hit-and-run strategies are utilized by these creatures in order to inflict the most amount of damage possible upon ground soldiers and vehicles once the air defenses have been rendered ineffective. Even bigger than the harpies are the fearsome Hive crones, flying monstrosities that are used to fight against the most dangerous of weapons that the defending faction has at their disposal for aerial dominance. They are able to fly at high speeds and maneuver with remarkable dexterity, making it incredibly difficult for ground-based anti-aircraft fire to be effective against them. They dive at enemy aircraft, destroying them with their bioacidic spines and tearing them to pieces with their talons as they come in for the kill. The mycetic spores that are also being unleashed contain various types of creatures within them. Some of these, such as the various strains of gaunts, start making preparations right away with the upcoming attacks. Alternate strains start to make their way underground by digging tunnels, creating routes for the other creatures to attack from. Others, like the Molochs and Trigons, start burying deeper to plant the spores that will later grow into gigantic capillary towers. After the Tyranid forces have successfully established a footing on the surface of the planet, they start the process of wiping out any resistance standing against them. The planet itself seems to come alive in pain. The ground trembles and revolts as innumerable creatures emerge from below the surface, and the air chokes with millions upon millions of flying creatures and spores. There are never-ending swarms of the lesser bioforms, such as gaunts, gargoyles, and gene stealers, who rampage across the air, the land, and the waters. The number of gaunts that emerge from seemingly everywhere seem to be infinite for the defenders, who are often overwhelmed by the sheer force of numbers being thrown at them. Capillary towers, which range in height from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of meters tall, emerge from the surface of the planet behind the front lines of the battle. These towers collect the biomass that the swarm has previously ingested, and then uses it to create more creatures to take part in the assault. And during this point, the cults created by the gene stealers rise up with full power, striking key points in the defense system, killing important figures, and ambushing any unsuspecting forces, creating further chaos and confusion within the defenders. Then they join the Tyranids in the offensive. The sheer number of Tyranid organisms attacking at once means that they are able to quickly overcome even the most robust defenses, drowning their opponents in a torrent of chitin, talons, flesh, and blood. The Hive Mind allows the massive horde to coordinate their assaults with deadly efficiency. Synapse creatures are deployed to ensure this. Creatures such as hive tyrants, zoanthropes, and Tyranid warriors, amongst others, transmit the Hive Mind's will to the lesser creatures, ensuring that the swarms act as a single, unstoppable entity. First, let's discuss the zoanthropes, also classified as Tyrannicus animus abhorrens. These creatures are amongst the strangest of the Tyranid swarm's myriad breeds. They are extremely potent psychers, and it appears that they were designed to serve as living conduits for the deeply focused will of the Hive Mind. So extreme is their genetic development that they have atrophied bodies and swollen brains that are entirely energized by pure psychic power. A zoanthrope can fire extremely powerful warp blasts at their opponents. These creatures prefer to fight at long ranges. Due to the physical weaknesses and deformities, they can only move by psychically levitating themselves, drifting across the battlefield to rain bolts of incandescent warp energy down on their enemies, and coordinating the movements of the horde by extending the Hive Mind's will.
Can't you feel it? It's like a claw crushing my mind in its grasp, squeezing my brain between its talons. I can feel it scratching behind my eyes, tearing at my sanity. Emperor! Save us!
It has been documented by Imperial psychers that despite their immense power, zoanthropes sometimes seem to be victims to their own massive energy reserves, and there have been several reports of them psychically burning out, falling limply to the ground. But don't be fooled by this fact or their physical limitations, as they project a constant bubble of warp energy around them, turning aside even the strongest of physical blows. When a zoanthrope is killed, a psychic shockwave propagates as a result. Lesser Tyranid creatures that are within the synapse range will automatically either break or flee as swiftly as they can. That's why dealing with these types of creatures is of utmost importance to any defender. But not only these organisms transmit the Hive Mind's will to the lesser creatures. There are others also ensuring that the swarms act as a single unstoppable entity. Like the infamous Maleceptor, which is a recently discovered bioform in the Tyranid roster of creatures, as they aren't deployed often. These colossal creatures combine the brute strength of the stronger bioforms with the psychic might of a zoanthrope. These terrible creations can crush its enemies with both its claws and the formidable power of its mind. Being an adaptation of the zoanthrope genus, the Maleceptor has also given most of its upper body to a masked brain-like organ that acts as a raw, living conduit for destructive psychic powers. Another type of creature that helps to keep the momentum of the assault is the massive Tervigon. These are less of a synapse creature and more of an assault platform. Their massive bodies are shielded by a towering spined carapace that protects their soft flesh beneath. They serve as a living incubator, capable of spawning hundreds of termagants, ready to eviscerate and devour their enemies. These powerful monsters often surprise their enemies by the sudden army sprouting out of its underside, quickly overwhelming even the most prepared of combatants. The best method for the defenders for effectively dispatching a Tervigon is to concentrate all firepower on it as quickly as possible, in order to slay it before its termagants can have a chance to spawn and create a deadly, unstoppable swarm. All termagants employ their ranged weaponry to decimate the enemy at the front lines of battle, while Hormagons fiercely engage any opposition in close combat. These Xenos can be discovered in swarms of tens or even hundreds of thousands, along with other gaunt species, under the control of Tyranid warriors. The Tyranid warrior's brood, one of the many Tyranid creatures, is a vital part of their invading army, offering tactical adaptability and devastating prowess on the battlefield. They are formidable and lethal beings in of themselves, but they also serve as Tyranid synapse creatures, guiding lesser Tyranid bioforms and acting as the central nodes of a Tyranid hive mind's telepathic command system. It is argued that the Tyranid warrior is the most adaptable form of any Tyranid species yet encountered. They are able to equip themselves with a vast range of lethal biomechanical weaponry, in addition to other modifications, which enables them to fill a number of roles in combat situations. They are easily able to provide their fellow attacking creatures with either high-volume close-quarter support or long-range assistance.
Every one of the myriad of Tyranid warrior creatures is a killing machine, perfectly adapted to slaughter its victims. They are the ultimate predators, and we are their prey.
These are large creatures, taller than regular space marines, and there are hundreds of different known variations of Tyranid warriors. These organic killing machines can combine flying, walking, or leaping biomorphs with biomechanical symbiotes that function as ranged weapons, like as the Death Spitter, or attack symbiotes such as Scything Talons, Rending Claws, or both. Tyranid warriors are very adaptable, as seen by their capacity to mutate and generate new biomorphs in response to strategies employed by their adversaries, or to capitalize on weaknesses. Because of this, they pose a significant danger on the battlefield, and are a key instrument in expanding the will of the Hive Mind. At this point, the planet itself is dying. The Hive Fleet's bioships are continuously unleashing clouds of spores as the assault happens. These spores begin the process of altering the prey world to suit the Great Devourer's needs, and prime the world for its absorption. Non-Tyranid life is eliminated from the oceans, the lands, and the atmosphere, as well as the air itself, the water, and all organic life. Everything is decomposed and prepared for absorption, while the planet's defenders are still being butchered, primed for their own consumption. In situations where sheer numbers are not enough to defeat the defensive systems of the planet, the Hive Mind may direct heavier forces to aid in the battles being fought. If a defense position appears to be hard to overcome, the Hive Mind is quick to adjust its strategy. It is possible to employ Raveners and Trigons to burrow under defenses and launch attacks from behind or beneath the enemy lines. Molochs also serve this purpose. They are colossal worm-like Tyranid bioforms that burrow themselves, traveling deep underground to bypass any defenses and then emerge behind the enemy to destroy supply lines, command posts, or artillery batteries, then vanishing back underground before their foe can even retaliate. Severe earth tremors have been recorded in every instance of a Moloch attack, becoming the primary indicator that such an attack is imminent. The unrelenting main assault is led by large creatures such as Carnifexes and Hive Tyrants, which are heavily protected and armed with advanced bioweapons. Carnifexes are actual living weapons of mass destruction that are immune to damage from gunshots and small arms fire because of the thick carapace that covers their bodies and protects their most important organs from harm. They are typically armed with the most cutting-edge Tyranid bioweapons, such as venom cannons or barbed stranglers, and their primary purpose is to serve as shock troopers in order to breach walls and reinforced gates, launch frontal shock assaults on entrenched enemy positions, and besiege fortified locations and armored vehicle formations. On the other hand, Hive Tyrants are massive creatures that serve as the main commander of a Tyranid swarm, a synapse creature that stands tall above the lower bioforms. Hive Tyrants are arguably the most important creature on the battlefield, since they wield enormous psychic powers, and it is said to have the deepest synaptic link with the Hive Mind compared to any other Tyranid bioform. Standing over 6 meters tall, they tower over dreadnoughts and are covered in a hard and thick carapace, making them hulking monsters that would impose their will even to the strongest of enemies. They also display a wide variety of physical characteristics, biomorphs, weaponry, and more, suggesting they are more individual than any other Tyranid creature, in a way that is yet to be fully understood. These terrifying monsters have a mind so cunning, keen, and tactically aware that can surpass the galaxy's finest strategists. They were created for one purpose: to outthink their prey, in addition to overpowering it. In the event that a Hive Tyrant is killed in combat, a new one will be developed in a Hive fleet to take its place. This new Hive Tyrant will have access to the same information and memories as its predecessor. Research is being conducted on how to combat this, as it would only spell the inevitable doom of every race in the galaxy if Hive Tyrants are not able to be stopped. It is important to note, though, that creating these specimens requires a considerable amount of bioresources and time. So the Hive fleets need to be strategic when it comes to creating and deploying these fearsome creatures to lead the innumerable hordes forward. It is safe to say that at this point the defenders have thrown everything they have at their disposal against the Tyranids. Every stratagem, every terrain advantage, every military resource, every desperate measure is being used or has been used by this point, majority of times to no effect against the overwhelming forces of the Tyranids. Massive, towering beasts are deployed to serve the purpose of being living artillery cannons. They fire at any remaining gates, walls, buildings, any structure that still stands. They fire at any defender who still fights, or any surviving inhabitants that still stands its ground against the infinite Tyranid swarms that now floods everything. The famed Biovore, for instance, is responsible for the maintenance and development of an ongoing clutch of spore mines, living bombs that spread poisons, acids, and jagged chitin shards around the battlefield, covering their opponents and making combat difficult for them. They advance in combat by thumping forward and anchoring themselves into the ground with protrusions on their forelimbs. At the same time, they launch their foul payload from a dorsal opening, triggering a powerful and shuddering muscle spasm that throws the projectiles forward. So it is that the Tyranids advance and devour everything in their path, in a cruel series of waves of destruction and death, charging forward to establish battlefronts that can be hundreds of kilometers long. The assault is overwhelming to their opponents, with the Tyranids using sheer numbers and strategic assaults on key points to overrun their prey. They attack in waves, each wave more powerful than the last. Each wave adapted to counter the strategies used against them. At this point, even eliminating the Hive ship would not avert the damage already done. More so, the invading forces have firmly established an overwhelming presence on the target planet. The objective to defend can be considered lost by now. Even while the most aggressive bioforms continue to engage in combat with the last pockets of defenders of the now doomed planet, other creatures begin sweeping up behind them and collecting all of the valuable biomass. Any remaining defenders are inevitably devoured or are fleeing for their lives, only to still be devoured shortly thereafter. The final stage of a Tyranid invasion is consumption. This is when the Tyranids begin to absorb all of the biological matter on the planet. Untold thousands of rippers, which resemble maggots, are dropped from the sky to form enormous swarms that are packed closely together. With their mouths full of fangs, they eat whatever organic matter they come across, whether it be living or dead. They use their powerful jaws and acid to break down organic material, leaving behind only barren rock and ash. The consumption is swift and efficient, with the Tyranids leaving nothing behind. They consume all living creatures, from the smallest insects to the largest animals. They even consume the planet's atmosphere and its oceans, leaving behind only a lifeless husk. After these abominable things swallowed all that could be eaten, they drag and tumble their bloated bodies into the digestive pools created by the capillary towers, which extend tall against the skies and serve to gather all the dead biomass. These large capillary towers also grow in even the deepest parts of the planet's oceans, and as they continue to expand, they might even be able to alter the tidal flow of the planet, as their potent metabolic filtration systems continue to draw in all biomass to the Hive bioships above. New rippers are continuously created to propagate the morbid cycle of consuming the planet. The tunnels excavated by Trigons and Raveners are expanded by burrowing variations of rippers, which also consume any subterranean fungus, root systems, and any other underground creatures they encounter. Mineral deposits are also being exhausted. Notably, rare ores and material that can be combined into the exoskeletons of the many biomorphs and upgrades that the Hive Mind deem adequate for future organisms, always adapting, always evolving. After the planet's resources have been completely harvested and processed, the Tyranid fleet's hive ships will begin to absorb the biomaterial that has been produced as a result. This biomaterial will be used to fuel the creation of new Tyranid organisms, and will adapt the Hive fleet for future invasions. While this is going on, a substantial amount of the capillary towers are also being dismantled, so that the biomass they contain can be reabsorbed by the hive ships above. It is argued that at this point, the only option is to perform an exterminatus of the planet. It is far past the turning point, and is no longer salvageable. And by destroying what remains, the defenders are at least denying the biomass to the Great Devourer to feed, and it can no longer be used to evolve the fleet for further attacks. Although this method may not always be the most viable, and even then, it is probable that at this stage the Hive fleet's many bioships would have eliminated any remaining ship or orbital weapon capable of doing such a thing. Once the planet has been stripped of all life and resources, the Tyranids move on to their next target, leaving behind a barren and lifeless husk of a world. This horrifying depiction of the Tyranids' unrelenting quest of biomass and their ability to adapt and evolve is shown through the process of planetary absorption. This method not only ensures the destruction of the entire planet that has been invaded, but it also strengthens the Hive fleet, making it an even more powerful opponent in future instances of further invasions. The ravenous hunger of the Tyranids, along with their ability to assimilate and adapt to new environments, makes them one of the deadliest things in the galaxy. The Tyranids are unlike anything the Imperium of Man or any other race on the galaxy has faced. Their ability to psychically command through their synapses and the ever-present Hive Mind being connected to every battle makes it almost impossible to keep up with their rapid evolution and their countless bioforms. One might think that perhaps understanding this hive mind and the creatures that genetically splice new Tyranid broods would be the key to stemming the infinite tide. In understanding how Tyranids communicate with each other through a psychic resonance called the synapse, researchers have discovered something horrifying. They have found that the synapse connection, which is an ever-present link between the commanding Tyranid bioforms and their subordinates, is merely an extension of the hive mind. The Gestalt collective consciousness of the entire Tyranid race, a psychic embodiment of their instincts to devour and consume all life. It is not capable of conscious small concepts. Rather, it operates as a gigantic agglomeration that developed from the psychic aura of untold billions of Tyranid creatures. This is in complete contrast to what we understand about our own minds, and as such, some say it is impossible to truly comprehend the intentions or the complex thought processes of the hive mind. It is a nightmarish and incomprehensible intelligence that enables Tyranids to cooperate and adapt, as though each individual creature is a singular portion of a greater, gigantic organism that is entirely focused on consuming everything. In combat situations, some sizable and comparatively independent Tyranid creatures, like the Hive Tyrant, the Swarm Lord, the Zoanthropes, or the Tyranid Warriors, possess the ability to psychically project the hive mind's directives to control the lesser life forms with what we call the synapse. The Tyranids are able to move swiftly and attack in coordinated actions that often overwhelm any opponent they come across, because they quickly adapt and overcome them. For any defenders that face the horrific prospect of a Tyranid invasion, it is imperative to identify and kill these key organisms, as without the psychic guidance from the hive mind, the smaller bioforms simply devolve into instinctual, non-sentient behaviors centered around feeding and survival. And as such, they are easier to pick off and eliminate. Psychers and scholars who have researched this psychic phenomenon have come to the conclusion that the resonance of the hive mind is so potent that it bends the warp for light years in all directions around the position of a hive fleet, which acts as a powerful synaptic node of the hive mind itself. When this happens, even Imperial astropaths are unable to send or receive telepathic transmissions, which also stops any spacecraft from entering the warp, and causes any spacecraft that is currently in the warp to veer wildly off course as warp travel becomes unpredictable and chaotic, many times more so than it normally is. It is a powerful and suffocating psychic signal that covers entire star systems and interferes with all types of warp travel and communication. The phenomenon in question has been given the name of the shadow in the warp. It is said to be a byproduct of the ongoing communication that takes place in both directions between the hive mind and powerful psychic creatures it commands. It is mostly triggered by the signal of the colossal hive ships that are oftentimes the most connected to the hive mind. But certain Tyranids, such as the Hive Tyrants, the Brood Lords, and even Tyranid warriors, can also cause this phenomenon to a lesser degree. Other side effects of the shadow in the warp include inducing terrible nightmares in average citizens, psychers, or those with warp sensitivities. They often suffer from severe headaches, uncontrollable, sudden screaming, bleeding eyes, or in the worst-case scenario, complete unconsciousness, as their mind reels against this alien barrage. This shadow of the warp phenomenon tends to become strongest on a prey world that is the target for an invasion, as the Hive Mind sows terror and confusion, preventing its doomed inhabitants from calling for help. It has been known that many planets are plunged into madness and despair before even the first mycetic spores fall from the sky. Interestingly enough, it has a strange effect, one that researchers and scholars haven't truly found an explanation for. But it happens that the shadow in the warp also prevents entities such as demons from being able to manifest or cross over into real space from the warp. Although in reality, any planetary defense force would be more than occupied with the upcoming Tyranid invasion. The thought of a demon manifestation would be the least of their concerns.
The only thing that can be heard in my city now is the eerie scream of the wind, where there used to be so much life, activity, and even laughter. The structures have not been damaged, but all signs of life have vanished, leaving behind only an unsettling silence. The night is impossibly dark, yet I can see. And I see too much. I see as an endless sky stretches overhead, a canvas painted with impossible colors, yet all consumed by a looming darkness. It's as if a black hole has opened up in the very fabric of the cosmos, devouring the very stars and casting monstrous shadows. That darkness is spreading, blotting out the universe. And then they appear, beings of nightmare, creatures that defy all reason and sanity, towering behemoths that ripple and twist, adorned with blades like mountains and maws gaping into nothingness. Smaller beasts swarm around their titanic kin, an ocean of chitin and ichor, screeching and chittering. They are all part of one grotesque organism, a singular entity of absolute hunger. The Great Devourer. The Tyranid Hive Mind. The fear grips me. My blood runs ice cold, yet I cannot run. My feet are rooted to the ground as the shadowy twisting forms advance. They are here and not here, flickering in and out of reality. A flood of sensation rushes into my mind. I see tendrils of terror, hunger, and an alien consciousness. The nightmares are always like this. The shadowy invasion of my dreams by the Tyranid Hive Mind. A constant reminder of the terror we are all living under. The inevitable doom that draws ever closer. Each morning I wake up drenched in a cold sweat. The echoes of the nightmare fading, but leaving a lingering sense of dread. A dread that is shared by all on this seemingly doomed world.
It is commonly agreed that the Hive Mind is not something that mere mortals can understand. It is pure alien logic, governed by concepts and intricacies that are beyond our comprehension. Every Imperial Psyker who has attempted to make contact with the Hive Mind has ended up either eternally scarred by the experience, permanently left insane, or have perished altogether as a result of their efforts. This could be because it takes an exceptionally strong psyker to be able to endure the colossal psychic presence of the Hive Mind, or it could be because the simple fundamental nature of the Hive Mind is so incomprehensibly foreign that not even the most intelligent human beings could hope to fathom it. To try to establish some sort of psychic connection to the hive mind results in psychers going utterly insane as trillions of aliens scream and screech from the inside of their mind, completely destroying their psyche and leaving the individual in a blank state, muttering incomprehensible words, forever scarred. One counterpoint to this theory, however, is Tygurius, chief librarian of the Ultramarines, who seems to have some sort of affinity with the hive mind. Tygurius is no ordinary psyker, however. It is claimed that he possesses the ability of foresight to see into the future, frequently having prophetic visions and glimpses of what will come to pass. Due to the enormous psychic presence of the Tyranid hive mind, many believed that it was impossible for him to survive communion with the Tyranid hive mind. However, he was able to do so. Not only has Tygurius survived these encounters, but he has also gleaned important information about the Tyranids in their plans, aiding the Ultramarines and the rest of the Imperium in their struggle against the Xenos threat. But he is the exception, not the rule, as he is regarded as being among the most powerful psychers that are still active in the galaxy today. It is not clear how exactly Tygurius is able to accomplish this feat. It might have something to do with his extraordinary psychic strength, his capacity for foresight, his powerful mental discipline, or some other distinctive facet of his psychic powers. It is also possible that his prolonged contact with the hive mind and the Tyranids in general has possibly enabled him to achieve a level of resistance or comprehension that is superior to that of ordinary psychers. His limited capacity to comprehend the hive mind and use that information against the Great Devourer symbolizes a glimmer of hope for the Imperium in its fight against the dire Tyranid menace that only grows with each passing day. It is noted that study has begun on how to harness the synapse of the somewhat autonomous Tyranid creatures, such as the Hive Tyrant or Tyranid warriors, as a weapon against the hive mind. But, as of yet, nothing has come to fruition in this regard.
Here, the Adeptus Mechanicus Majus Biologus analyzed one of the greatest threats to the Imperium: the Tyranids.
Some members of the Adeptus Mechanicus believe that the hive mind is nothing more than a psychic network that connects the Tyranid race and grants them access to collective knowledge of the location and disposition of all other Tyranid beings. They believe that the most effective course of action will be to find a way to disrupt the network, rather than weaponize it. Others are of the view that it is actually an enormously powerful psychic entity of horrifying proportions that is controlling the Tyranids like puppets. Some individuals are even of the opinion that it could be an old one that has lived through the ages and has come back to consume us all. But as you can see, the theories and beliefs about the hive mind are as varied as they come. A more localized and compact version of the Tyranid hive mind is forged through the interconnected telepathy with the gene-stealer brood, forming what's known as the brood mind. The psychic connection is used to manipulate those unfortunate hosts who have been infected with Tyranid genes, leading to the establishment of a gene-stealer cult in a world that is soon to be prey for the Great Devourer. Gene-stealer cults are insidious infiltrators They operate by infecting hosts with their genetic material, which eventually gives birth to hybrid creatures that maintain a human-like appearance while being mentally linked to the brood mind. These individuals are hard to detect, and that's why it's often tricky to detect and neutralize a gene-stealer cult before they have grown exponentially. Over generations, these cults grow in size and influence, undermining societies from within while appearing as ordinary citizens. This allows them to prepare the way for a Tyranid invasion, subtly and effectively. The brood mind, while smaller and less powerful than the overarching hive mind, is nonetheless a potent tool of expansion. It helps the gene-stealer cult to coordinate their efforts, remain hidden, and exert control over their infected hosts. It also serves as a psychic lighthouse, attracting a hive fleet to the planet, harboring its corresponding cult. In essence, the brood mind represents a more local and focused application of the same telepathic control that the hive mind exercises over the Tyranid species as a whole. Contrary to what many believe, the hive mind does not act on instinct alone. While the Tyranids are driven by a basic instinct to feed and expand, the hive mind that controls them is an incredibly complex and highly intelligent entity. As evidence of this, it has been stated that the hive mind had a particular desire for vengeance towards the Blood Angels. Instead of merely possessing a primal urge to consume, the hive mind operated on a higher level. There is a quote that states, "The hive mind knew. The hive mind thought. It felt. It hated. And it desired." The hive mind looked out with its innumerable eyes towards the dull red star of Baal. It apprehended that this was the hive of the warriors that had hurt it so grievously. It hated the red prey, and so it drew its plans and set in motion its trillion bodies towards the consumption of the creatures in red metal, so that their secrets might be plundered and re-employed in the sating of the hive. In this extract from the book Devastation of Baal, the hive mind is said to feel, hate, and desire. These are emotional states, suggesting a level of subjective experience. An entity acting purely on instinct would not typically be characterized by such emotional depth. Also, the hive mind is said to be able to draw plans and set in motion its trillion of bodies, indicating an ability for strategic thinking, planning, and coordination on an unimaginably vast scale. The intent to learn from and utilize the secrets of its adversaries, in this case the Blood Angels, suggests foresight and the ability to adapt and evolve based on acquired knowledge. In summary, it can be said that the hive mind is an entity with a high degree of cognitive complexity, emotional capacity, strategic planning, and by far, adaptability. Far beyond what would be expected from a creature operating solely on instinct. The implications are horrifying, as it demonstrates that the Great Devourer has an extremely sharp and adaptable mind, working tirelessly to kill and consume everything as it travels across the galaxy.
Darkness, emptiness. It claws at the edges of my thoughts. A void. A living embodiment of emptiness. The tranquility of my mind, once my sanctuary, is now a battlefield. I'm paralyzed, yet I am more alert than ever. My psychic abilities that I've honed over years of experience and extensive training are tested to their limits in this dreamscape. This is an alien entity that is beyond anything that follows any logic. Visions unfurl before me. I see a world stripped bare, oceans boiled away, mountains ground to dust. Endless swarms. The creatures of nightmares undulate over the charred remains. The hunger. The unending, insatiable hunger of a billion creatures. A psychic scream that drowns out my own thoughts. There are eyes. Countless eyes. All staring, all knowing. All part of a singular entity, the Tyranid Hive Mind. They see me. They know me. My thoughts, my fears, my memories, laid bare before an alien consciousness that has no empathy, no mercy. The psychic barrage assaults my defenses. An onslaught that is as much emotional as it is mental. I can feel it attempting to consume me, to add my essence to its own, to devour everything that is me. Then suddenly, it ends as abruptly as it began. I regain my sight, my heart pounding against my ribs. Though the psychic attack has ended, its echoes still ring loud in my mind. The reality is terrifyingly clear. This is not just a psychic attack. This is a warning. A taste of the real onslaught to come.